Yes, yes. We'll, we may have the opportunity to come back to some of these issues as we proceed forward. I do want to move to another question that came from a viewer in Nicollet County, and I'm going to go to Representative Swedzinski on this because the viewer is raising an issue about a bill in the House. This viewer is concerned about chronic wasting disease, noting that we have 450,000 deer hunters in Minnesota and 132 deer farms. And this viewer believes that to protect our wild herds, we need to get rid of the deer farms. Another viewer points to a CWD bill, chronic wasting disease bill, sponsored by Representative Jamie Becker Finn, that's in the House Environment and Natural Resources Committee, and wants to know whether or not that's going to pass and whether or not our panel supports it. The general topic, chronic wasting disease, the specifics are as represented. Representative Swedzinski, your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, I think everyone wants a safe herd within the state of Minnesota. I think this is a particular issue. The science is a bit questionable whether the prions or not. We've been told by folks at the U of M that they're concerned that it will make the jump to Minnesotans through the deer population. I don't believe that to be true. I believe that we've got some grandstanding going on within the academic field in order to gain money from the state. As far as, these are small business owners. We've seen a general change where, our deer farmers have been regulated in general by the Department of Agriculture. And I think today there's kind of a duality of regulation where they have, armed DNR officers and folks in the DNR, from the Department of Ag that go out and help regulate these producers. And, I think, it's probably a little bit of an easy group to pick on. But, as far as, if I'm not sure what the majority wants to do. I think there is some appetite by folks to drive this industry out of the state of Minnesota. I'm not sure that's necessarily healthy. If you look at what some other states have done, the state of Michigan, they've been able to really do a lot of research in the particular area of resistance. So just like scabies within sheep that we've dealt with in years past, and some major diseases, and really run those genetics out to have resistance to CWD. And I think that would be a better option, potential to help bring some of those genetics into the state to help with some of that resistance. Because if you look at Wisconsin, you look at those things, we do have outbreaks, but we do, we have deer that swim back and forth across the Mississippi or the St. Croix River as well. I think, the state should be taking a leading role in looking at how we can work on those genetics so that we can ensure not only our natural population of deer have the protection that they need, but also our domesticated versions within the deer farm areas as well. So, as far as the
Senator
particular bills,
Mathews.
I don't serve on environment, so I haven't been tracking them that close. So,
I know we've had this question before. Senator Mathews, chronic wasting disease, your thoughts?
Yeah, been an issue that we've had to look at more and more in the last few years. And I agree with Chris. Deer farmers are often an easy target for folks to focus on. But I'd encourage folks to reach out and try to talk to them. I have several that I know of that are in my district or close to it. And there have been examples of, one or two bad actors among that, but it's not representative of these small business owners as a whole. And it's not fair in any area to judge an entire group or category of people by the worst performing members or by the worst ones that do it wrong. And there are many farms that do it right, that have the protections in place, that manage their herds well. And frankly, even if it were true, right or wrongly, getting rid of deer farms is not going to get rid of CWD in Minnesota. There's going to be other management, oversight, maybe look at, there's protections you have in place with what farmers need to do after hunting and whether the disposal needs to be handled a certain way. That's the things that we can focus on that can have tangible efforts. And so I always try to approach these by what's the evidence, what can we actually do, and what will end up having a good result in the end. So going after deer farms, I don't believe will accomplish what you want. More research, more study, keep management zones or control zones where you need them, have the experts looking in on them. Those are some of the concrete, tangible things that we can keep doing.
Senator Frentz.
Well, I have not much to add. I think many of the high points of this debate have been covered. I served on the Senate Agriculture Committee the last 6 years, in which we had jurisdiction over the Board of Animal Health. And as Representative Swedzinski pointed out, there was an agreement to try concurrent authority. The Board of Animal Health, in my opinion, is an impressive organization that deals specifically with disease outbreaks. We've provided funding to the veterinary diagnostic lab at the U to help us diagnose and prevent the spread. We have over $4 billion in gross domestic product in this state just from pork production. And the Board of Animal Health feels that we have some weapons we can use, a couple of which have been alluded to. It is tough to have any business owner feel threatened by government action. I mean, it's just kind of inherent in us that we don't like it. I can see the dynamics. I'm not on the Agriculture Committee anymore, but I would just point this out to folks. We have about 450,000 deer hunters that either are in the state or come into the state. That's important. They have a certain tourism, and there's revenue for the state in tourism. That's a good thing. The deer hunters are now under 200 family businesses. And I think the best point on here, and we see this sometimes, but to Senator Mathews' point, a couple of those deer farmers really did not appreciate the way they conducted themselves. They made it much harder for a lot of legislators to be sympathetic to deer farmers on the whole. And I think, we have a duty to each other as Minnesotans to try to take the high road on some of this stuff. Nobody wants the disease to spread. And I guess what I would see is hopefully continued partnership between the DNR, who after all has officers that can help us. The Board of Animal Health doesn't have, conservation officers they can send out. And try to make it a common goal to limit the spread. And I think closing businesses, depopulating is the federal term, really ought to be a last resort in any industry, not just deer farming. Let's try to make sure that we support Minnesota businesses. There is federal money for depopulating. That is only for the herd that has already been infected, though. And so there are calls. I think this caller who's from my home county of Nicollet is saying, what about closing them down? I'm not ready to take that step. But I respect that there's a real issue here, and hopefully we'll get on top of it.